Good morning. It's good to see you today. My name's Chris. I'm the pastor here at Christian Chapel. As Kareem said earlier, if you're a guest, we're so thrilled you're here. Maybe it's your first time back in a while. It is good to see you. If you're joining us online, we're happy to have you with us as well. We're in the middle of a message series that we've called the Lazarus Life. And so we're exploring the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11 and 12. If you have a Bible, we'll be in John chapter 11 this morning. But Lazarus' story, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a story of sickness. It's a story of death. It's a story of Jesus being close enough and powerful enough to intervene, and yet not doing exactly what we would want him to do, what Lazarus and his family would want him to do. Ultimately, Lazarus' story is a resurrection story. It's a story of Jesus coming when all hope seems lost and doing what no one thought was possible. So over the past couple weeks and over the next 2 months or so, we're slowly working our way through John chapter 11 and just pausing at each little step along the way to ask, what is the Lazarus story teaching us about Jesus? What is it teaching us about the kingdom of Jesus? And what's it teaching us about when we find ourselves in the same sorts of moments that Lazarus and Mary and Martha and the disciples find themselves in John chapter 11? This morning, we're going to see that Jesus always looks at everything from a different perspective than you and I do. So if you have a Bible, we'll jump into John chapter 11. We'll start in verse 7 this morning. Just a quick summary of the first couple verses. Lazarus is a friend of Jesus. He is sick to the point of death. His sisters Mary and Martha, they send word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love, your buddy, is sick. Jesus tells them the sickness will not end in death, but will glorify God. So everyone probably thinks that's awesome. Lazarus is going to be healed. Jesus is on his way to Bethany. And then it says Jesus stayed where he was 2 more days. And that's where we're picking up the story in verse 7. It says, and then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. Now, Judea is the area around Jerusalem. It's the area where Bethany is as well, where Lazarus lives. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It's when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but the disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. All right, so there's a lot in there this morning. I'm really excited to jump into it with you. But first, I have a quick question for you. How many of you are puzzle people? You enjoy doing puzzles, right? My wife is a puzzle person, so I didn't realize that actually when we got married. But in her family, one of their Christmas traditions was to put out like the big 1,000, 5,000 piece puzzle and just slowly work on it over Christmas break. Now, I'm not a puzzle person because I am an impatient child. I don't have time for it. In fact, if I'm going to do a puzzle, it's going to be more like this, right? Like this, this really is like Angie and I's marriage in a nutshell. This is her patience, her intelligence, her ability to trust and have faith and persevere. And this is mine in all of those areas. Of like, I'll do a puzzle, but like this little 36-year-old puzzle made for 3-year-olds to be laid out on the floor might still take me 10 minutes, right? And about the same time it would probably take your 3-year-old. But here's the thing. When I come up, when we got married, her and her dad would be doing the puzzles at Christmas, and I would walk by and thought, this would be a good thing for me to do. But I would sit down and I would pick up the first piece. And I couldn't do anything until I found where that piece fit. Now, when I'm doing my puzzles, that's pretty easy to figure out because there's only 10 pieces, right? So I can generally figure out, like when all the edges are done, there's only 2 pieces left that go in the middle with the kind of puzzles I like. But with Angie, with those 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 for some of you, it's hard. My problem is I turn the piece into my hand into the only piece of the entire puzzle. Right? But Angie and you guys that are good at that, you have the ability to work the edges. right? You separate it into colors. If you find a hard piece, you push it aside and you save it till it becomes an easy piece. I pick up the one, I'm like, this doesn't fit. I think they messed up the puzzle, and I quit after 60 seconds. Right? And this is what a lot of us do. So what I want us to think this morning, we're going to talk about how Jesus has a different perspective than we do. When it comes to our problems, when it comes to our issues, when it comes to things that we're struggling with in life, even if you're actually a really good puzzle person for real, when it comes to your problems, you're a lot more like me than you probably want to admit. Because what do we want to do? We have our problem, whatever it might be. It might be relational issues. It might be financial. It might be emotional. It might be issues at work or at school. It might be a problem with a friend or a family member or a neighbor. Whatever it is. When it's our problem, we tend to lock in on it, and it gets bigger and it gets blown out of proportion. And the biggest problem we have is, even if we believe my life is full of puzzle pieces that God is using for His glory, it's one of those puzzles where it's all the same color. We don't necessarily have a picture to look at and say, oh, that's what God's doing, so I can be patient here and I can trust here and I can persevere here. And so what do? We take our piece, and to God, that piece might look like this, but to us, it looks like this. We start to blow it up and we start to focus on it. And you've been in these seasons of life before, right? Where one problem changes the way you see the entire world. Where it's not just something you carry around, but it actually begins to obstruct your view. You're peeking through, and everything you see is in light of that. And things might be going great at home, but you've got this problem at work and it's clouding your vision. Or things might be going great at work or great at school, but you've got these relational issues or these underlying health concerns. And everywhere you look, you're seeing it through the lens of that problem. You're seeing it through the lens of how's this going to end and what's God going to do. And before you know it, what you have done is you have magnified your problems to the point that you have minimized or distorted your view of God. So what we're going to see in the Lazarus story this morning is that there's a couple instances where the disciples have a perception of a problem. And they maximize their problem at the expense of minimizing their view of God. And now this is one of those chances for us just to, you don't even have to say you have that tendency. You can sit here this morning and just think, hey, you know what? I'm just here to learn from the disciples' mistakes. I'm here to learn that when I see problems, Jesus sees possibilities. Okay, so that's good. We can all just have that. Or maybe you can be really honest this morning. You can say, no, I've come in with some stuff. And it's some big stuff, and it's some scary stuff, and it's some stuff that's right in front of my face, and I don't really know what to do, and I don't really know how to act. And this morning, what Lazarus' story is going to teach us is God always has a different perspective than we do. And so with our problems, before we start trying to fix it, before we start trying to force this piece there or that piece there, what we want to do is just stop and for a moment say, Jesus, how do you see this? And Jesus, what do you want to do in it? So in this passage we just read, there's a couple things we're going to look at. So the first problem the disciples encounter is a problem encounter of danger. And then they encounter the problem of death. And in both moments, they see things that are insurmountable and things that should be avoided. And in both instances, Jesus says, no, let me tell you what I see, and now follow me right into the middle of it. So we're going to learn a couple things this morning, right? Jesus has a different perspective for two reasons. First, because he knows his plan, and second, because he knows his power. So the first thing we see is that Jesus has a different perspective because he knows his plan. So if you were to go this afternoon and read in John chapter 10, it's the story right before Lazarus' story. And what happens is Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's teaching, and he's attracting crowds, and he begins to confront the religious leaders in some really uncomfortable ways for them, and in ways that lead Jesus to really kind of be in a risky situation. So the disciples are with him through all of this. You can read in John chapter 10, multiple times in John 10, Jesus is right on the verge of being grabbed, imprisoned, stoned to death. And each time it says he escaped their grasp. Right, there are so many of these little statements in the Gospels that I think one day when I get to heaven, I want to be like, hey, what was the story behind that? Like when it says Jesus escaped their grasp, what does that mean? What did that look like? I mean, was it like me trying to grab my kid when they were 3 years old and suddenly they were made of Jell-O, right? And they could get out of anything? Was it just you're not going to do that now? And they all said, okay, and he walked down the middle? I don't know what it looked like. All we know is it was threatening to the point that Jesus and his disciples were told in John 10, they escaped to the other side of the Jordan where John the Baptist had been baptizing. Now, if you remember stories about John the Baptist, one of the ways he's described is he's the crazy guy out in the middle of nowhere. So what do Jesus and his disciples do when they're threatened in Jerusalem? They escape to the other side of the Jordan. Basically, they go out to the sticks. They go out to the middle of nowhere. They escape from the threat, and they're far enough away where now they feel safe. And it's in that setting that word comes to Jesus, Lord, Lazarus, the one you love, is sick. Now again, we hear that, but we don't know all the context. We're not part of that. For the disciples, as soon as they hear the report of Lazarus, in their mind it turns into, oh no. Because they know where Lazarus lives. Lazarus lives in Bethany, which is just 2 miles from Jerusalem. It's in the region of Judea, and they know, oh man, we've seen Jesus heal a lot of people, we've seen him do a lot of things, but he loves Lazarus. He's probably going to make us go back there. He's probably going to walk right back into the lion's den. And so where you and I read the story of Lazarus and we see Jesus makes the statement, the sickness will not end in death, and then he stays where he was 2 more days, we read it and think, come on, Jesus. The disciples probably in the moment are experiencing thinking, oh, thank you, Jesus. Like, thank you. I don't know what you got planned, but it looks like you're good to stay here. And we are good to stay here too. 2 days pass, and it says, and then Jesus said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. Right? This is the moment where the puzzle piece in their hand is like flashing and just says danger right across it. Right? Danger, 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 don't go back. But again, they've followed Jesus long enough now to know he's kind of a big deal. He knows some things they don't know. He can do a lot of things they don't do. And so they don't oppose him, but they try to remind him. Like, hey, Jesus, you remember the last time we were there? Probably just a handful of days ago. The Jews there, they tried to stone us. I mean they tried to stone you. And I really don't think it'd be in your best interest for us to go back there right now, right? It's a very gentle, and you and I have been in that spot before. God asks you to do something, you're like, well, that sounds a little risky. Lord, not sure if you're aware, but there's some reasons why this is not a good idea. Right? There's some things that maybe just let me tell you. Like, Lord, I know you said you want me to forgive them, but I think you might have forgot what they did to me. Lord, I know you want me to make this generous gift, but I think you've forgotten about my savings goals. Lord, I know you want me to serve in that space, but I think you've forgotten how hard I work and how much I enjoy my leisure, and I just don't really want to give any extra. Lord, I know you've called me to whatever it is, right? And it seems risky. And our first response, instead of saying, okay, if you call me, you must have a plan for it, is to say, well, let me just make sure you know exactly what we're talking about. But what we're learning in the Lazarus story is Jesus always has a different perspective. And one of the different perspectives he has from us is where we see danger, he sees opportunity. Right, where we see reasons not to go, not to do, not to engage, not to forgive, not to love, not to give, Jesus says, that's the exact reason I'm calling you into this space. See, for the disciples, they only see Judea as the region of death. But Jesus sees it as the place of resurrection life. He knows his plan. And he's working his plan. And his plan is Lazarus is dead. By the time we get there, he's going to be good and smelly, and I'm going to call him out of that grave. Why? He tells the disciples, so you will believe. Now again, we've got to think of the larger context of what's going on. Within a short time after calling Lazarus out of the grave in Bethany, Jesus himself will be in a grave outside of Jerusalem. And in that moment, what story do you think comes to the disciples' mind? It's the story of Lazarus. They remember just 2 miles away from here, we watched Jesus call Lazarus out of his grave. And Jesus has told us that his death is not going to be the end, that he's going to come back. And so what Jesus is doing here is, yes, he's calling them into a dangerous situation, but he's doing it to teach them a lesson he can't teach them anywhere else. And so when Jesus begins to call us into new spaces, when he calls us into new experiences, he's doing it because he has a plan. And part of his plan is to teach us things we can only learn when we have to completely, totally rely on him. Right, so Jesus, the disciples make this statement, Lord, hey, I don't know if you remember, they tried to kill you a couple times. Maybe it's not the best idea. And then sometimes as you read through the Gospels, and you even see it in this story, sometimes Jesus responds in very blunt, direct statements that everyone understands. And sometimes he responds in ways that you're like, I don't know that you heard what I said. Right? It's like I made a comment, but you had already started your own conversation over here. So the disciples tell Jesus, Lord, we don't know. You want to go back. They killed you. And it says, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. I don't know about you, but if I was the disciples and my concern was if you go back there, they're going to try to stone you, and Jesus gives me a lecture about 12 hours of daylight, I'm going to be like, Lord, let me rephrase this. The last time we were there, people wanted to kill you, and I'm afraid if we go back, they're going to try to kill you and me again, so maybe can you do the thing where you say the word and they're just healed over there? Like, can you do that one while we stay here on the safe other side of the Jordan? But Jesus just tells them, hey, there's 12 hours of daylight. Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble. But when a person walks at night, they stumble. Well, what is Jesus saying? Now again, this is where you have to kind of back up and think in the larger context of all the things he teaches us. Again and again and again, Jesus contrasts his kingdom with the kingdom of the world. His kingdom is always defined as a kingdom of light. A kingdom where we see God, where we experience God, and where we walk with God, as opposed to the kingdom of the world that's a kingdom of darkness. That's a kingdom of groping about, a kingdom of fear and uncertainty. So what is Jesus saying? He's not ignoring the objection of the disciples. He's actually meeting it with the truth of who he is. In effect, he's saying, you can't see what I see because you are still plagued by darkness. You're still thinking as the world thinks. You're still walking as the world walks. You have not embraced the perspective of the Father and the Son. You don't know the kingdom that is being established, but he's assuring them, if you'll just stick with me, I'm the light and you will not stumble. It's wonderful encouragement to you and I when Jesus calls us to do things that might seem dangerous, when he calls us to do things that might seem risky. The best place we can be is right next to him as he's leading us on that path. And so many of you have these stories, and you can tell these stories of, God called me to do this. He called me to go there. He called me to give that up. He called me to walk into this. And maybe even people in your life responded like the disciples of, hey, are you sure about that? I don't know that that's going to turn out well for you, but you knew Jesus was calling, Jesus was leading, and your job was to follow him. Jesus has a different perspective because he knows his plan. And so in this situation, he knows, I'm telling a resurrection story. And a resurrection story requires a dead man. And in this case, it's really going to be someone I know who's been dead a while. So there is absolutely no doubt. Right, that this was not, he was almost dead and then Jesus showed up and he made a miraculous recovery. But he was cold, dead in the ground. And so Jesus knows, well, that's where Lazarus is, so that's where I have to go. And then the disciples accompany him along the way. Right, so Jesus has a different perspective because he knows his plan, but he also has a different perspective because he knows he is powerful enough to work his plan. I love the interaction with Jesus and the disciples about the condition of Lazarus. Because Jesus, he starts out speaking kind of metaphorically and quickly understands the disciples are just not picking this up. So he gets very clear. And in their defense, I would not have picked it up either. I would have responded in the exact same way or possibly worse. Jesus phrases his announcement of Lazarus' condition, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. Right? So from their perspective, they heard Lazarus was sick. Jesus, the one who heals the sick, that they believe to be the Son of God, says, hey, our friend Lazarus is asleep, so I'm going to go back to the place where they almost killed me. I would like you guys to come with me so that we can wake him up. And they respond exactly as you and I would, Lord, Lord, Lord. Right? I mean, they are respectful. They are kind. Right? I think this is the ancient Hebrew equivalent of bless your heart. Just like, Lord, bless your heart. If he sleeps, he will get better. Right? This is the same thing you tell your children when they don't feel well. You know what you need? You need a nap. You need to go to bed early. I bet if you go to bed 2 hours early, you'll feel extra good tomorrow. I bet if you sleep in a little bit in the morning, you'll feel even better. This is the disciples' response of like, Lord, if he sleeps, we don't need to go back into the lion's den. Like, we don't need to take the risk. He will wake up. And so where previously Jesus has met the disciples' objection to danger with kind of this obscure teaching on light and darkness, now he meets their objection to death and sleep as clearly as he can. He says, look, Lazarus is dead. You know, which if I'm the disciples, I'm like, why didn't you start there? Like that, I understand dead. I thought I understood sleep, but apparently I don't. Right? Because you said sleep, but you meant dead. The rest of us, when we mean dead, we say dead. When we mean sleep, we say sleep. Right? We might say sleep like a rock, but we don't say sleep like a dead man. Right? Nobody says that, because what does that mean? It means you're dead. Right? So we can all understand this. So Jesus is just very clear. Lazarus is dead. And then he says, it's good for your sake that I wasn't there. So many layers here of things that are going on, showing Jesus' perspective. I mean, if I'm the disciples and I hear Jesus say, Lazarus is dead, but for your sake it's good that I wasn't there, my first question is, what about Lazarus' sake? What about Mary and Martha? What about this poor messenger who came 2 days ago and you said the sickness won't end in death, and now we've just been hanging out having dinner? And now he's hearing from you for the first time. Hey, you know what you came for? He's dead. I know what I said. He's dead, right? Like, just so many, but again, completely different perspective. Where we look at the puzzle piece and we see death. Jesus looks at it and says, sleep. Where we see permanent and we see final and we see no way around it. To Jesus, death equals sleep. Which is a remarkably different way of looking at the world. Have you ever, I don't know, maybe you have you ever done any reading about all of the efforts and the research that's being done to extend life, to defeat death? I mean, literally, billions and billions of dollars. Some of the world's brightest minds are engaged in how do we extend life as long as possible? How do we beat death once and for all? And for all of their money and all of their expertise and all of their experiments, you know what they have? Maybe a couple extra years. But death still comes for all of us. Like, it's the one undefeated enemy. Of all the problems we have in life, death is by far the biggest and the most permanent. And yet to Jesus, he says, yeah, that thing that you worry about more than anything else in the world, the thing you have no hope of defeating, it's like sleep. Angie and I, we have 3 kids who are, the 2 boys are teenagers, and the youngest is almost a teenager. So what that means is we have 3 people in our house right now who love sleep. They love it at more than you probably do at any point in your life. I don't really understand, but I remember being there. I'll sometimes talk to some of our high school kids or college students, some of our interns or people that work around the building, and I'll see them during the day. I'll say, hey man, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm tired. You're tired? You're 18 years old. Like, what are you tired from? Like, did you hurt yourself sleeping last night? No, I did. Right? Did you wake up every 2.5 hours? No, I did. Like, why are you possibly tired? What is so, like, is it just it's really taxing to worry about yourself all day? Like, I don't understand. But I remember as a teenager thinking, man, I'm just always tired, always worn out. So what that meant was, as a teenager, I loved Sunday afternoon naps. I loved weekends with nothing to do in the morning. right? And now those are distant memories. I don't know, like if I get a 20-minute Sunday afternoon nap, that's awesome. But in high school, I would go home and sleep from like 1 to 5. It was incredible, right? And then I'd take such a long nap that I couldn't go to bed Sunday night. And so then I'd stay up till 2 o'clock, and then I'd get up and go to school, and I'd be so tired, and I'd run that whole cycle till the next week. And I'd live it again, right? Now, my kids aren't that bad, but they are definitely in the ballpark of, hey, if it's a Saturday with nothing to do, like Angie and I can be fairly confident, we got the house to ourselves until at least 10 o'clock in the morning. So because of that, we get a lot of chances to wake our kids up. Right? And I know some of you, you're parents of young children, and you're like, what is that like? Because you've got the little 3-year-old that comes in your room at 5 a.m. in the morning, like, is it morning yet? It's dark outside. We've been over this, right? Get back in your bed. I'm starting to wonder, are you not learning night and day? Like, you're going to read that thing from Jesus to them later, and maybe that will help them, even though it didn't help the disciples. And so we've just kind of got this, but now for us as parents, we've got opportunities to wake our kids up. And when we wake them up, Angie and I, there's no like pre-game meeting before we walk upstairs to wake the kids up. All right, I'm never going to her and being like, Ange, listen, I really need you to pray with me right now, because I'm about to go wake up a teenage boy, and I'm not sure if I can do it. You know, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to have the right words to say. I don't know if I'm going to have the right actions to take. Never once have I doubted my ability to wake someone up. What do? I march upstairs, and now again, in your house too, there are 2 different ways. So if I wake the kids up, there's one way. If Angie wakes the kids up, there's another way. So if Angie wakes them up, she walks quietly up the stairs. Right? If I wake them up, I'm stomping up the stairs, thinking like, this is your warning, it's coming, right? She gently cracks the door. I throw the door open right against the wall. She walks over and opens the blinds to let a little sunshine in. I flip on the light and shut off the fan as I go over to open the blinds. She very gently says, hey, bud, it's time to get up. I walk in with, what's wrong with you? Why are you still sleeping? Do you want to be homeless? Right? And so you just, you go down these. Now here's the thing. Regardless of how you wake someone up, you are confident. All I really got to do is I got to walk in the room and I got to open my mouth. And they're going to hear my voice and they're going to sense my presence. Right? And they're going to wake up. Now, they might not be happy about it, but they're going to wake up. And eventually they're going to get up and they're going to move about their day. And just think of that just for a moment this morning. That is how casually Jesus views death. Yeah, we're going to go back to Judea. You know they want to kill you. It's fine. Lord, but they want to kill us too. It's fine. Let's go. Let's go see. Lazarus is sleeping. Oh, okay. I mean, he's dead. Well, why are we going if he's dead? Why? Because Jesus knows he's going to show up, and Lazarus is going to hear his voice, and he's going to sense his presence, and he's going to get up. And that's just how the story's going to end. And so why does Jesus not have fear of being stoned to death? Because he knows death is just sleep. And even if he dies, he's going to hear God's voice, he's going to sense God's presence, and he's going to get up. I mean, the kind of confidence you have to refer to death as sleep means you are either just stone cold crazy, or you have access to a power that no one else in the world knows or understands. We'll see this later. Even when Jesus shows up at the tomb, he prays this really short little prayer. And even when he's praying, he's saying, basically, God, I'm not praying for you. I'm not praying for me. I'm just praying for all these folks around to know who's resurrecting Lazarus. Just absolute confidence. Right, so what does that mean for us? It means if Jesus sees death as sleep, then how does he view all of the other problems that I think are so big and so overwhelming? Right, what it forces us to consider is where we see problems, Jesus sees possibility. Right, where we see the impossible, Jesus just sees his plan. Where we see undefeatable obstacles, Jesus sees his power at work. And then we get the disciples' response, right? So they have been thoroughly corrected. Okay, so we're going to Judea, apparently. We're going to do that. Something to do with light. We're not real sure, but maybe it'll make sense when we get there. And Jesus thinks that when someone's dead, they're sleeping, but he's going to wake them up. And he's going to do it for our sake. All right. And then I love Thomas's response. All right, Thomas, so if you're not familiar with Thomas, we know him not a whole lot in the Gospels. He's most famous as Doubting Thomas, right? Peter gets to be called the Rock. John gets to be called the disciple whom Jesus loved. Thomas gets to be Doubting Thomas. What a ripoff. Did he tease Matthew and Mark and Luke and John? Was he bigger than them and kind of picked on them? Did he eat first? What did he do to them that they decided, you know what, the picture we're going to... Thomas winds up being the first Christian missionary to India. He's martyred in India. The Indian church traces its ancestry back to Thomas in the first century. He's an amazing man, and yet we know him mostly as Doubting Thomas, the one who said, I won't believe he's resurrected until I can put my fingers in the holes in his hands and put my hand in the hole in his side. And then here in John chapter 11, Doubting Thomas comes to us as Negative Thomas, right? Where he turns to the disciples and says, well, let us go, that we may die with him. Can you... Now, so that's the way we read it. I don't know. Perhaps John meant that Thomas looked at the other disciples and said, let's go. We're going to die with him. But what we know of Thomas, and especially his response after the resurrection, it is much more, well, let's go. Let's die with him. All right, Jesus, we're going to follow you, but I would just like to have it on record with the HR department that I think this is a bad idea. Right? I hear the unanimous consent of the other 12. I will not oppose, but I will also not affirm. Let the minutes reflect. Thomas abstained after voicing, we're all going to die. So we can give Thomas a hard time. Right? But really what it does is it should give us hope. Because I don't know about you, there have been some times Jesus has called me to do things and I have reluctantly obeyed. I have practiced delayed obedience. And I've said, well, let me try my way a couple different ways. And when that doesn't work, then, Lord, I'll follow what you want to do. Right? So Thomas has this moment of, okay, let's go die with him. But the most important part is not what Thomas says, it's what Thomas does. He goes. He follows Jesus back into the lion's den. He follows Jesus all the way back to Bethany. He still doesn't fully understand what's going on. And more than likely, he speaks on behalf of many of the other disciples. Jesus, we don't know. We thought you were ushering us into your kingdom, but it seems like you're determined to get us killed. But we'll go. It's similar to what Peter says to Jesus earlier in the Gospels, where he says, where else would we go? You have the words of life. What else would we do? Right? When you start to see the world from the perspective of Jesus, when danger becomes opportunity, when death becomes sleep, suddenly you find yourself doing things you never thought you would do and going places you never thought you would go. And not everyone always understands, and often you won't even understand, but sometimes you just got to say, I guess I'm going to die with him. But if I do, he just told me he can wake me up. So we'll just go see. So what do we learn from Lazarus today? What does it teach us about the gospel? What does it teach us about Jesus? It means Jesus is always bigger than our problems. Always bigger. Always bigger. The biggest problem you have this morning is death. And Jesus has told you, I can handle that. And so if he can handle the biggest, then surely he can handle all of the smaller things that we're dealing with as well. All right, so think, what would your big puzzle pieces be? Like what are those large ones in your life? Maybe it's death itself. Maybe you're grieving the loss of someone you love, and Jesus says, yeah, I've got a plan for that. Maybe it's some relational hurt. Maybe it's some relational trauma. Maybe it's hardship or difficulty. Maybe it's that person that no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they just keep coming at you stronger and stronger. Maybe it's lies that have been told about you, places where you feel like my reputation has been put on the line. I need to defend myself. I need to speak up. I need to stand up. It's clouding your view of everything. And Jesus is saying, I got that. Right? If I can handle death, I can handle whatever you got. Right? It's your financial need right now that what you need is not even close to what you have. And you're thinking, I don't know. Not only do I not know what I'm going to do in the future, I don't know what I'm going to do today. I don't know where lunch is coming from. I don't know where my next provision is coming from. And Jesus is just saying, I got that. I got that. I got that. I mean, if we had time, I would pass these out to you. I'd tell you, write it. Just write it on there. Whatever your problem is this morning, write it on there. Is it a diagnosis? Write the diagnosis. Write the doctor's name. Write the treatment plan. What's Jesus saying? I got that. I got that. I got that. I got that. If danger is opportunity, and if death is sleep, then it means Jesus is always bigger. Now, the fact that he's bigger doesn't mean he doesn't care. He's not looking at our stuff and saying, like, look, would you just get over it already? I've told you who I am, and I've told you what I can do. No. He sympathizes with us in our weakness. He comes to us in our despair, and he gently and lovingly says, you've blown it out of proportion. It is serious, it is personal, it is powerful, but it's not the end. Why is it not the end? Because he's the God of resurrection. Because he's the God who says death is just sleep. And with the word, I'm going to wake him up. And so because he's bigger than our problems, then our job, like Thomas, is we're just going to keep following. And sometimes we're going to follow with a really good attitude. And sometimes we're going to follow with a really terrible attitude. But the point is, you just keep following. Right? And as you keep following, what you're going to learn is, I'm not the first, the last, or the only person to be holding some pieces in my hand that don't make sense. But as you keep following, you're going to start to hear the stories of others in your community of, hey, when I was in that spot, here's what Jesus did. When I was there, that's what he did. And here's now how I can see it all starting to fit together. Here's the picture that God was creating. Here's how he was joining my life with them and with them and with them. And together, we're collectively presenting a picture of the kingdom. And what starts to happen as we just keep following is we move from these large puzzle pieces that obstruct our view, and we start to get a better understanding of, no. Everything I face in life is small. It's just light. It's momentary. It's fleeting. God uses it all. He works in it all. It doesn't mean he doesn't care. But it means he's not intimidated. It means he's not afraid to enter into it with you. I mean, we see this all through the scriptures. You can read through the scriptures and you see God again and again and again saying, here's what my perspective looks like. Or we've got a few of those for you to think about this morning. So with Abraham, the world sees an old man with a barren wife wandering around in the desert. And God sees the father of a nation. Right? With Moses, the world sees a stuttering outlaw. God sees Israel's deliverer. With David, it's just this, David's literally the runt of the litter. He's the one overlooked by his own father. When Jesse the prophet comes and says, bring me all your sons, one of them is going to be king. Jesse doesn't even bring David to Samuel. He just leaves him in the field. How do you feel if you're David when they're like, hey, this guy says one of you is king and we were sure it wasn't you. But now he wants to meet you. He becomes the king, right? Gideon, he's weak, he's insecure. He even says himself, I'm the least in my clan, the least in my family, from the least tribe in all of Israel. And God says, you are a mighty warrior. A completely different perspective. Mary's just another small town woman. Most likely a teenager that is completely overlooked, completely forgotten about. And God says, you're going to be the mother of Jesus Christ. Lazarus is dead, he's smelly, he's buried. And Jesus says, that's the resurrection story. That's the one that's going to foreshadow my resurrection. That's the one that's going to prepare the disciples' hearts and faith for when I lay in the ground. Peter, the world looks at and says, oh, he's a kind of an impulsive fisherman. flies off the handle, loses his temper, and Jesus says, you're going to be one of the most important leaders in the church. Paul is persecuting the church. They're actively praying to be delivered from him. And God says, that's going to be the missionary. That's going to be the one to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. So what do we see in scriptures? What do we see in our lives? We see again and again and again all these things that don't make sense. All these things. I mean, everything you're holding on to this morning. Jesus looks at it and he says, I have a plan and I have the power. So all you have to do is just lay it down and trust. Right? Just release it and believe. And what you'll find as you lay yours down is there are dozens and dozens and hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and millions of people around the world throughout history who have been in the same spot you're in and said, Lord, I don't know what to do. And his response is, it's okay. I've got it. You just keep following. Follow him through the grief. Follow him through the insecurity. Follow him through the pain. Follow him through the doubts. Follow him through the questions. Follow him through the sickness. Follow him through the moments where you think, Lord, I know what you want to do, and now would be a good time to do it. Follow him through the spaces where he calls you into risky places to do risky things. Follow him into the things that you're convinced are too small for you. Follow him into the things that you think are too big for you. Wherever he calls you, your only job is to follow. And whatever he's put in your hands, you're praying, Lord, will you please give me the right perspective of this situation? Don't let me maximize it at the expense of my view and experience of Jesus Christ. Don't let me blow it out of proportion. But God, will you work? Will you move? Will you have your way? And his response every time is to reveal his plan, to provide his power, and to lead you on the path of life. If you'll stand with me, I want to pray for you. Then the band's going to come back. They'll lead us in a final song. Jesus, we come to you this morning, and each of us come carrying our own puzzle pieces that don't make sense. Lord, there are spaces where you have called us to do things or just moments and relationships and trials and difficulties that have fallen in our lap, and we're not real sure what you're doing or how you're working. Lord, if we're really honest, sometimes we wonder if you even care, if you even hear or see. So Lord, this morning we come and we ask that you would help us to regain a proper perspective on our situation. Help us to lift our eyes up off of our circumstances to the God who directs our circumstances. Lord, give us the vision of the Spirit that sees danger as opportunity, that sees problems as possibility, that sees pain and grief as a place of healing and joy, that sees need as a spot of provision. Lord, in all of these spaces and in so many more, will you come and lift our eyes up to see the God who cares, the God who loves, and the God who is moving towards us. And Jesus, I pray, especially for those today who may be with us in person or online, they've never begun that relationship with you. And I pray today that they would receive you as their Savior. They would cry out, Lord, and declare their need for you, and you would begin to fill their heart and their mind and their soul with new life, with forgiveness, with restoration, with hope, with peace, and with joy. Lord, will you come and show us how you see us? Show us how you see our problems. Show us how you see our difficulties. Show us how you see our success and our failure. And in all of these spaces, Lord, give us eyes to see, give us ears to hear, give us hearts to obey the direction you are leading us on. Jesus, we declare today, we believe you are bigger than every problem we face. And so we commit, we will follow you wherever you lead. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you'd like someone to join with you about some personal needs you have in your life, if you'll head out the back doors and to your left, our prayer team would love to meet with you in the prayer room and pray those. You can also do that online at christianchapel.com/prayer. The rest of us, we're going to sing this last song that Lauren led us in earlier as a reminder of God's great faithfulness. He sees you, He knows you, He loves you, He has a plan, and He's working that plan this morning.